Hello, hello. It is 6:28 is what I have on my phone. So we have just a couple of more minutes and we'll get started with our
Okay.
dialogue. So excited. Yay.
I'm
Evening,
transferring.
everyone.
I am transferring from my cell phone to my laptop, so I can't get my background to work out right.
We'll give you a sec.
Just like really weird.
It's Robin. Tell your husband happy birthday.
I will definitely do that. Thank you.
Yes.
I'll say good evening to everyone. Thank you all for being on tonight. Let's see, we got just 1 second. Looks like we have everyone here and we want to say good evening on behalf of our Common Ground Peace, Justice, and Unity for All group. We want to welcome you and thank everyone for participating. Welcome, welcome to the first Benton Dialogue on Race, Law Enforcement, and the Community. This is the first of 3 community dialogues that the City of Benton has planned and that are designed to improve conversations and awareness that we have on issues of race, racism, racial justice in our city, our county, and our state and our country. The dialogues on race, primary focus is just that, to have dialogue. So by listening to one another's personal stories, we can gain insights into our own beliefs and those of others and come to new understandings of the issues that we face. By sharing our personal experiences, we can learn more about each other as individuals and about how we have been influenced by our racial and by our ethnic origins. At the same time, we can shed light on our different perceptions and understandings of race relations. We know racism is dynamic. We know racism is insidious. And racial practices have become so incorporated into our way of life, into our practices and beliefs, that some of us don't even realize it's there. It impacts our social lives. It impacts our economic well-being. It impacts our educational institutions, law enforcement. Every part of our life, every part or every quality of our life is impacted, especially as Black and Brown people or people of color, the things that we experience. It's an issue that we must be willing to address because we believe it's in our city's best interest, in our state, in our country's best interest, that every person, no matter their background, their race, or ethnic origin, can and should equitably enjoy the opportunities available to us. We believe the call for change is urgent and persistent. Until we are willing to acknowledge the issues and engage in meaningful discourse, change cannot come. And as a songwriter said, change is going to come. Not long ago, we gathered together on the Saline County Courthouse lawn and we marched for justice. We marched for Breonna Taylor, for Ahmaud Arbery, for George Floyd. But not only for them, we also march for the many others who have given their lives for this moment of reckoning. Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, and the many others whose names we will never forget. We kneeled, we prayed, and then we made a pledge. So that's why we're here today. This is the first step in our keeping of our pledge. It starts here. It starts with conversations that build awareness and an understanding. We're here tonight because of our shared values of justice, community, opportunity, and equity. From those shared values, we want to build a bridge to a shared understanding of the important role that we all play in making change happen. So today, when we're taking this first step in that commitment and to that pledge, not only to have dialogue, but to also develop a solution-oriented, future-focused plan for reconciliation and healing for our community. We believe change starts with each of us. We all play a role. So as we kick off the first of these three discussions, with each of them focused on, this one in particular is focused on law enforcement and the community. And as we enter into this discussion, we acknowledge with respect the dedication and the sacrifice of the officers of the law. They have a very hard, a difficult, and admirable job of providing crucial services to the communities, our communities that they protect and they serve. And for that, we back the blue, we support them, but we also strongly believe that the good outweighs the bad in law enforcement. But at the same time, we acknowledge that there are attitudes, there are practices, there are beliefs, there are policies, there are systems that can and should be eradicated. We should talk about them. They should be addressed. And we believe that law enforcement can and should coexist peacefully with people of all races. So where do we start? What changes can we bring to this conversation, and what changes can we expect? How do we get there? By first acknowledging that the lives of our Black and our brown people, the lives of Black and brown people matter. It's a belief. We're speaking of a belief, not an organization, but a belief that all people, especially people of color who have been traditionally marginalized, should have access to the same levels of equity, equality, freedoms that have been afforded to our white brothers and sisters. It starts by acknowledging that racism is real and that it has a detrimental effect on our communities. It starts by acknowledging that some of our policies and some of our practices are indeed racist and they create inequity. We must be willing to shift our mindset, our practices from what we've always done. This is the way we've always done it, and be willing to see and to hear people for who they are and engage in meaningful conversations and be willing to have, do the hard work to bring about change in our communities. So with that in mind, we share our ground rules for our discussion that we would use our head, our heart, and our hands to have this dialogue and to engage in that action. We use our head to hear and to see others' perspectives, especially those who have been historically marginalized. Use our hearts to acknowledge the pain and the problems and be vulnerable enough to hear the truth and to speak our own truth to power, and to be willing to go from here using our hands to work hand in hand and hold ourselves accountable, our friends and our loved ones accountable, to do the necessary work to bring about the change. All of our panelists received a list of questions ahead of time. And so we shared those questions, and we welcome input from our general audience and encourage you to share comments, and we'll try to address those during the session. Veronica Jackson is joining me as co-host to help with the comments from the general public. But in terms of the discussion tonight, the panelists have received the questions ahead of time. We did ask them to review them and make note of any questions that they did not feel comfortable answering, did not receive any feedback that anyone felt uncomfortable, so we'll proceed. This is a roundtable discussion. So everyone will get a chance to answer different questions. And we ask participants to limit their responses as much as possible to 3 minutes because of the number of participants, so that everyone will have an equal opportunity to respond to the questions. I apologize, I did not start out by introducing myself. My name is Robin Freeman, and facilitating this conversation with an humble heart, and thanking God for the opportunity to be here with this distinguished panel, and also welcome Veronica Jackson, who is serving as co-host and helping facilitate the conversation. We do have a distinguished panel tonight, and so it is a great honor that we welcome them to the table. I did hear from Sheriff Wright tonight, and he said that he was mistaken on the date and he would not be able to participate. So he will not be on the panel. But for everyone else, we welcome you and thank you for being here. So at this time, we're going to open it up and have our discussion. And we'd like to start by giving you a minute to introduce yourselves, and starting with Mayor Farmer, the Honorable Mayor of Benton, and introduce yourselves and tell us, what do you love about your community? So I'm going to stop the share of my screen, and so that everyone can be seen. And I am going to start with Mayor Farmer. Welcome.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I never know. Hey, I thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. I've lived in this community well over 40 years. And matter of fact, I'm looking at Mr. Terralis here, who I consider one of my kids. And I've loved this community because it's always been so close-knit. It's always been one that takes care of people, takes care of our brothers and sisters. And I think the whole issue we have is learning how to love again. And so I appreciate being a part of this. I do recognize we do have some issues that we need to address, and we need to have change. Change is never easy, but it's usually for the good. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. Thank you for letting me be here. And like I told Ms. Robin, I'd like to attend all 3 meetings just to hear and see what's going on, because part of the deal is I want to know what's going on in the city of Benton.
Thank you, Mayor Farmer. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to go to Chief Scotty Hodges, Benton Police Chief.
Hi, I'm Scotty Hodges. I'm the Benton Police Chief. I've been the police chief since August of 2017, but I've been with the Benton Police Department since 1996, just a little bit over 24 years now. I've lived in Benton for 26 years, and I guess ever since I moved to Benton, I've considered it home. It has a hometown feel. I love the family setting that Benton has. I love the fact that everyone works together for a common cause, whatever that cause is. I know we get together, groups of people, at least once a month to do some kind of activity, and I just love the way it is. I love that we're small enough to know each other, but not too big to not care about each other. I love Benton. Did y'all hear me?
Thank you. Yes, we
Okay.
heard you. Thank you. I was a little slow to unmute myself. Thank you, Chief Hodges. Next, we have Alderwoman Jocelyn Cash.
Good evening. I'm also happy to be a part of this discussion, and I love my community. I grew up in Benton, specifically the Ralph Bunch community. I've been here all of my life until I left in 1972, and I returned in 2010. And one of the things I love the most about it is the fact of the connectivity that is here in the Ralph Bunch community and in Benton as a whole. But I really like the fact that the people here in my community everyone knows everyone, and when there is a need in the community, people do come together, and they work together for the benefit of them all. So I'm excited to play a part in this discussion, and like the mayor, I would like to participate in the other 2 remaining sessions that we may have.
Thank you, Jocelyn. We're going to move over to Minister Christopher Threet.
So I'm Christopher Threet. I'm the minister of the Johnson Street Church of Christ. I'm blessed and honored to be the minister at Miss Cash, her mom, and a host of our family members. We worship together. And unlike many of you that I've heard so far, I was not born and raised in Benton. I moved to Arkansas to take care of my young family. At the time I moved here, my daughter was 1 year old. She's 27 now. And so we moved to Benton when she was in third grade over at Howard Parent. And we've lived here those years. And for the first part of those years, I think Benton was kind of this is where I live, but Little Rock is home. And over those years, I work in Little Rock, but Benton is home. There's been a shift because of the church relationship and because of the community. And I heard a couple people always mention been small enough to raise a family, but it's large enough for the family to get things necessary to take care of themselves, be it they choose to stay here or move on. And so it's community, and like every community, it has things it needs to work on, but there are things that we can't work on with love and intention. So thank you for having me on the panel today.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is John Reed.
Well, good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to say that I am honored to be a part of this discussion. I'm glad you reached out and asked me to do this. I am from Benton. I was born and raised here. Up until I joined the Navy in 2002, I stayed gone for about 15 years, but then I came back home. And so once I came back home, I got into law enforcement with the Saline County Courthouse. I am a bailiff there. So that is what I do now. So I'm just glad to be back home. I'm glad that, our community is a bit of a tight-knit family, and that is what I love about it most. And I saw that you asked in there about a little interesting fact about yourself or something, and I'm probably one of few people, if not the only person around here, that can probably say they actually stood guard with a sitting president while I was in the Navy. So I just like the opportunities that I've had in life and to be able to say that I came from Benton, Arkansas.
That is pretty darn cool. Thank you for being with us, John Michael. Jamela Wade Thomas, welcome.
I always get stuck on the mute part. Thank you, Robin, for inviting me. But my name is Jamala Thomas, and I am a Benton transplanted here to Benton. I'm originally from a little town right outside of Forest City, Arkansas called Colt. So like population 236. And so what I love most about Benton is that it does give me the feel somewhat of the community that I grew up in. And it's an amazing place to raise my children. We've been very welcomed here. And so it's small enough to kind of remind me of home, close enough, the commute is not bad. So I get that disconnect from working in Little Rock, and, just lovely enough and quaint enough and peaceful to raise my family.
Thank you. Thank you. Jamala, thank you.
No problem.
And last but not least, we have Minister Tamala Stevens.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am a Benton lifer as well. Played sports here, grew up here in the Ralph Bunche community, and I'm excited for the opportunity to be on this panel, to have skin in the game, and to know that it's time for us to change some things and that be have those difficult conversations. So I thank you for this opportunity, and realize that we're not doing this out of a rebellious thing, but we're doing it to make a change and to help one another and grow in this community so we can be more tight-knit. Like when I grew up, it was such a family atmosphere. Everybody was responsible for everybody, and everybody, when you made a mistake or something like that, people like, Miss Carolyn Gray and people like that will make sure that you were, and Lil Jon's mom and stuff will make sure that, and my grandmother make sure that you were doing what you're supposed to do. So I think if we can get back to that atmosphere of the accountability and just showing each other respect on both sides, and taking away the white friends and black friends and just say friends and family, we can really make strides. So thank you for the opportunity to have me be here on this evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and dive right into our conversation. Our first question is for Mayor Farmer, Chief Hodges. Jocelyn, what is the state of race and race relations in Benton? And I'll pull this question up on the screen. So in your opinion, if you can see that when you get there, what is the state of race and race relations in Benton? And we'll just say Benton. And what programs are in place to address or combat racism? So Mayor Farmer, you want to start?
There, I'm unmuted now. You know, I'm not real sure what the question's actually asking as far as the state of rights is in Benton or Saline County. Could you explain that a little farther, please? Because I'm not sure what's being asked there.
So what is your perception of how relationships are in terms of race and race relations? What's your perception of where we are?
I think that we have some great relationships, but I also think we have relationships that are strained, that are separated. I believe that it's a twofold coin. You know, everyone's got to work together to do it. It's not a one person decide to make something happen, but everyone's got to be on the same page, working for the same goal, working with the same outcome in mind. If we depend on one race or another to try to make the change, it's never going to happen. I really like what Travalis had to say before. It's about everyone holding everyone accountable. It's about families growing up together and loving one another. And I appreciate him stating that. I do know that in Benton right now, there are some issues. There are some strained relationships. And how do we go about fixing those? Is by building the relationships and gaining trust and holding everyone accountable.
Thank you. Chief Hodges, state of race and race relations in Benton and Saline County, and if you want to speak to any programs that you think or that you know of that are in place in the police department that are addressing or combating biases or racism, you can certainly include that in your comments.
First off, I was like the mayor. I didn't fully understand the question when I originally read it. I think a lot of it is about people's attitudes, how they grew up, the community they come from, how they were raised, their parents, their family, how they act. So changing is going to be on an individual basis, which is huge, as we know, to change everyone's attitudes, everyone's opinions, the way people treat people. We can only do it by showing it. You know, you can't just tell somebody how to act. You have to represent that. So I try to do that every day in some form or fashion. I try to spread something to someone, whether it be a kindness, a kind word, just to show I care. And I know it gets off the race topic, but it all comes back together with how to treat people. And we treat them all equally, fair. When we talk about training and various things that we do at the police department, we train our officers and employees to basically steer clear of bias-based practices. And we tell them to be fair and treat everyone equal. We watch it through quality assurance. We watch videos to ensure things are taking place properly. Not just the things that, I guess not just the incidents that we're supposed to be looking at. We pick random choices of videos to make sure the officers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, even when I guess that you would think no one's looking, that kind of stuff. So we take different practices and we do different teachings to try to curb any racial issues.
Thank you. Jocelyn.
Yes, thank you. when I think about the state of race relations here in the city of Benton, I really can't speak to it because it is set up. It is kind of where it is, that whereby when it comes down to issues such as activities such as school, ball games, and other activities where it does bring the public together and people work well together, they play well together, and it always turns out to be a good time. But then when we all go to our separate locations in our separate communities, I think I can deem to say that there is that feeling of isolation, segregation in the locations of where our communities are sitting. But all in all, I think that there is an effort for people to come together and achieve the goals of being one in the city of Benton. But we do have a long way to go, and outside of those, what I call organized activities where people of color and others come together and participate, it seems to work out fine. I just talking about even how I got a chance to even attend one of the salt bowls. And if you want to see real unity, you go and sit there and you see people all on the same place about their school and support and so forth on. But I think that there's some lacking, and especially if we're talking about law enforcement of our community specifically, being able to say that that trust and that interaction and that connectivity and working together. I really do appreciate what the City of Benton Police Department has done, how they come over and participate in different events when we have the cleanup here in the city once a year, when we have other activities like nights out, and the police are very responsive. But there are some minute issues that I think needs to be addressed when it comes down to the actual interaction between the police, law enforcement, and our community of color.
Thank you. The next question is for Jamala and Chris. Why is this issue of race and law enforcement important to you, and why should it be important to the community? Jamala,
You go first. Ladies first.
Thank you. Well, you know, for me, for personally, I think I've given my story before. So I'm a veteran. I was a member of the Arkansas National Guard, and I was with the military police unit, and I'm MOSQ'd as military police. And so most of the folks that I served with were full-time law enforcement, were in law enforcement full-time, and just they are some of the best people that I know. All different races, all different backgrounds, all different, you know, religions. And so I have a fundamental belief that the majority of people who go into law enforcement do so because they want to do good and they want to serve. I think it's important because there have been issues historically where there has just not been equitable experiences between people of color and people not of color in their interactions with the police. And that has historically lended itself to distrust between people of color and you know, the law enforcement. And I'm not naive to the fact that there are some locations in this country where geographically, you know, there is a lot of crime in all ethnicities. And sometimes, you know, those people of color may have had experiences that have not, you know, that have been out of egotism, you know, racism, classism, just pure mistreatment for whatever reason. I mean, it's the data is there, history has shown that. And I just think at some point we have to address those issues if we ever want to build that trust to where as kids, you know, we have McGruff the crime dog and you have all these representatives of law enforcement are your friend, and my kiddos, they love law enforcement. I don't want them to grow up and lose that innocence of trusting the person that you go to when you need help, to then think that this person would one day want to kill them when they're no longer young and innocent. And so for me, it's important that at some point we have to stop. If we have to stop and address it, and then we have to stop just that historical history repeating itself. And so it's important to me because I do fundamentally believe that people choose the profession because they want to serve and because they genuinely care. But we cannot ignore the outcomes that have happened. And in order to build that trust, we have to talk about it. And so that's why it's important to me. So.
Thank you.
The issues of equality and race is important to me because I kind of wanted to go back and look at the whole word community in the first place, you know, how it was defined and then apply it to Benton. Said a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. And when you think about that, we've been studying the book of Acts at church, and the disciples had all things common as you close Acts chapter 2, which is why when you go deeper into the book, they start selling things to take care of the needs of the collective. Because if you're hurting, I'm hurting. When you experience joy, I experience joy. So when we start talking about the issue of race and equality, why it's important, because we won't have true community as long as race is an issue. And I would raise it to say not just an issue, it has to go from voluntary to involuntary. And I think the first step on it being important is when we start tackling issues, I think sometimes we're intentional on the front end, just like when we're learning to tie our shoes or something, it's intentional, and then it becomes involuntary and we do it without thinking. I think that some of the racist practices that take place they take place so long they become involuntary. And so a person may not even know he or she is racist because I've been racist so long, I don't even recognize the signs. And I think that can flow more than one direction. So I think it's important because if we don't first address what's wrong, I cannot even know something's a problem. I think from law enforcement, it was mentioned we're going to randomly check on people to see what you're doing or what you're even aware of. I think when we start talking about race and why it's important is because if there isn't a genuine love of people without looking with our physical eyes, we're going to always have problems, and our community won't be what it won't reach its full potential. So I think it has to be discussed, and it has to become something that doesn't even need discussion at some point.
Thank you. Thank you both. For John Michael and Tavalis, tell us about an experience or experiences you're aware of with race and law enforcement in Benton or Saline County, or what has happened in your experience, or what's happening now that you like to share and make people aware of.
Wallace, I'll let you go ahead and start.
I was going to give you the honor since you are my junior, but it's a few instances, but I will just talk about. I'll make it personal. That way, I won't say anything about anybody and offend anyone. But I remember when I was in high school. My father purchased me a older model Mercedes Benz, and it had gold rims on it, and I thought it was the best thing ever. And so I went to school in Hot Springs. I used to come home on the weekends to see my family and to see my oldest daughter Tia. And I came down one weekend. I actually stayed at my grandmother's house after church, and it was a little bit late, and I was on my way back to Hot Springs, and I got pulled over. And the officer asked me, he was like, first thing he said, like, "What are you doing in Benton?" And I was like, "I'm from here." And obviously he wasn't from the community. So like, that's where another issue where when you're not from here and you come in and police, like, you don't know the dialogue, or even you don't know the forecast of the people from this community. You just don't know. So he asked me what was I doing in Benton, and I was like, well, I'm from here. I'm visiting my grandmother, and I'm just, I'm here. I'm headed back home for, to go to school this week. And he asked me, he was like, so where'd you get this nice car? What are you doing? I was like, well, my father, worked. He bought it for me. He's like, but to be 18 with a car like this, that don't make a lot of sense. I said, well, I thank my dad for it, whatever. And he's like, don't get smart with me. And I was like, I'm not getting smart, sir. I'm just, and everybody knows how we're raised to be respectable, whatever, and respect authority, because I've always had a respect for authority. I was raised that way, and it was never, you don't have a disrespect for police until you come into an encounter, and you still don't disrespect their position because it's a dangerous position. So to make a long story short, he was like, well, I don't want you to, when you come back down here, you need to check in. And I was like, check in with who? Who would I check in with? And so he was, he was like, well, then he was like, he got my license, my registration, everything checked out, and everything like that. Then he asked me a few questions, and he kind of calmed, and he was like, well, that's a really nice car. And I always showed him respect. And after that, he kind of chilled out, and he was cooler. And I was like, and then after, when he was getting ready to go, he's like, well, you drive home safe. So I think the way he came towards me, it was like on edge. And I think at that particular time, it's the profile in the car, the rims and all that type of stuff. And he came, as I responded to him, he kind of calmed down. But it shouldn't be that way. It should be like, we should have a mutual respect for each other, just no matter what type of car it is or whatever, we should. But I'm almost 40 years old, so that was 20 years ago. But that's one instance where I had that I was really, right after Rodney King had happened a couple of years before that. And you think that stuff happens in the big city, and you think that's nothing, like you don't really have to worry about around here. But it was a situation that kind of got me. It was kind of like, for the first time, I was like really shook, because I didn't know, I never thought about it before. I'd never been pulled over by the police. I never had anything like that. And the first thing was like, what are you doing here? And it's like, I'm home. I'm at my home. I shouldn't have to, you check my license, registration, whatever, but I didn't feel like I should have to defend myself in somewhere that I grew up. So that was the issue that I had, that I know about. And I can honestly say, after that, I hadn't had many encounters or stuff like that, but that was my first encounter with a police officer at the age of 17 years old. And for the first time, I was kind of shook, because I didn't, because the way it was approached the car. But like I said, as the conversation went on, it calmed down, it cooled, and it ended up being like that. And so thank God it wasn't nothing more drastic. And then he, and whatever, but that's my first encounter with it. And it was something that as a young Black man, I was literally shook, in knowing that I've been in this community my whole life, and everyone knew me and everybody knew my family. And to be approached like that at that particular time, that was my first encounter. But like, I haven't had that issue, but that was my first encounter with it.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your story. John Michael, anything you want to share on that perspective about your experiences, or what's happening now that you know about?
Well, I've never personally had an ill experience with police here in Arkansas. I won't speak on other states, because there's not a whole lot I can do that. And I get the complete, just certain officers being aware of things. And there are those officers that, as Savas was saying, they start off with one mentality of what they're fixing to get into, and it can easily cause a situation to go astray. The one thing I will kind of speak on a little bit is that there are some issues here in the county, and I kind of hate the sheriff isn't here, because what I'm about to speak of kind of deals with his department a little bit, and I won't go into complete names of anyone of what happened, but this situation kind of deals with my little brother, who used to be a sheriff deputy here in Saline County for a while. And even as an employee, he had people that would make comments, racial comments, that were just very unnecessary. He even had a superior that went out of his way, so to speak, to hold him back from getting extra training to try to help better himself and overall better the department. And when he spoke up to another superior over that one to have the situation addressed, he was later fired for it. So there are things that happen, and we chose not to make a ginormous stink about it. My brother is a very resilient person. He's not going to let one situation like that stop him from doing what he loves, which is law enforcement. From the time he got out of the Navy, he came home and immediately started working at the jail. He left and worked at Alexander PD for a while, went to the academy, came back, became a sheriff deputy at Saline County, and had that situation happen, and he's just stayed with it. He currently now is a sheriff deputy in Hot Spring County. But like my brother and I always say about things, you can't really address and completely fix certain issues like that if you're not willing to get in the middle of it. So being on the inside of it sometimes, or in this case, we're on the outside of it now, we can still bring these situations up to address them on situations that are there. Because like I said, even though we should be brothers in arms, while we're out there, you know, protecting the community and whatnot, you still have those people in those departments sometimes that still look at you like you're less than what you should be. So that's just something that my family, that we've kind of dealt with, but it still hasn't stopped us from caring for our fellow citizens and doing our job. As I said, the way we were raised was still to take care of those who need that protection. So that's what we do. That's what we've always done, and that's what we'll continue to do. But this is a good stepping stone to start addressing those situations, those issues, and bringing light to that, like that. But me personally, I've never really dealt with a complete racial issue like that from law enforcement here in this community.
I appreciate you sharing your story, your brother's story. Thank you. Chief Hodges, did you want to chime in on that?
I was just going to mention something from the previous speaker, that was a horrible first experience with law enforcement. And it's sad that was his first experience with law enforcement, because that kind of sets the tone, maybe even for the rest of your life sometimes. So I hate that happened to him, and I'm sorry that happened to him.
I accept your apology, and that speaks volumes that when situations do happen, we don't sugarcoat it. You just came back and you just apologize for that. And that's the way that we can start addressing and fixing issues, by just apologizing. And I accept it, and it didn't deter my perception of it, of law enforcement. Because like John said, I was about to call him Little John, but I forgot he's a grown man now. But he's always, his family or someone from his family was always in law enforcement and always came around the community. So it kind of, eased some situations up. But thank you for your apology, and I accept it.
Thank you. Thank you both. And I'm going to switch over to Jamala and ask a question about racial identity. What do you think are some of the common mistakes that we make or people make about our racial identity? And the question says, what do you think are some of the commonly mistaken ideas or myths that people of another racial identity group make about your racial identity group?
Oh, I pondered on that question because I didn't know if you were going to ask me, and I wondered how I would answer it and answer it eloquently and diplomatically, but honestly. I won't go down the list of some of the dehumanizing stereotypes that people may have of African American and Black people, because I think, we all know that. I think the one that kept coming back to me is, I wish people would understand that we are not a monolithic group, and that we are able to have several thought processes at one time. I can genuinely have a love, revered, respect, and honor law enforcement, but in the same breath say that as a Black person, my life matters. Not more, not less, it just matters. The same, it matters the same. And it doesn't mean that I don't have any respect for police officers or, white people or people of a Latinx, got to get the X part, background or what have you. Most African American people, we can have duality of thought, or we can have more than one thought process and care about more than one issue. And so for me, I wish that people accepted that more and did not did not accept the thought that just because we may say that this social justice issue that is affecting our community means that we don't care about other issues in other communities. Because historically, our community has been the most accepting, the most forgiving. We pretty much advocate for everyone because we know what it feels like to be marginalized. We go through that example. So, you'll see us on almost every front line of every social injustice. We're pretty much there, and especially African-American women. And so we're not monolithic in thought. We're not the same people, and we are able to support multiple causes, and we are able to care about just not ourselves, but everyone. And so that when I say that term, Black Lives Matter, it means my life and my babies and my mom and my husband. I want us to matter just as much as everyone else. It doesn't mean I'm anti-government. It doesn't mean I'm all these other political dehumanizing terms that are used. It means I simply want to be recognized as the same way, as a human. I want to be on the same level of humanity as everyone else. And there is a situation that is happening where I do not feel that. And so I think that is one thing. And the other is I just feel that, when it comes down to race issues, I do struggle a lot when people say that every issue, you just make it about race. And I remember telling someone that if you had a child or a daughter and she was walking down this alleyway and she trusted her gut instinct that she didn't feel safe and something inherently bad could happen to her, or there was something there that wasn't safe for her, and she made a decision to trust her gut instinct, everyone would say, oh, you're so smart, you trusted your gut instinct. But for Black people, there have been issues that have been traumatic for us for years. And that traumatic instinct is passed down. It's passed down. And we know there is not an imagination. There is not, we're blowing it out of proportion. We know when someone doesn't accept us. Every human being knows when you're not accepted. And for us, when you've gone through those experiences, it comes back up, and we don't ever necessarily get a chance to fully heal and talk about it, because when we do, it's there y'all go talking about race again. Well, that's the fabric of our trauma, because we have all these experiences that have been tied to our skin color or our race or whatever reason that we can't undo. So I can't undo being Black no more than you can undo being white, And so when those experiences happen, to invalidate that, to say that this instinctual situation, this instinctual reaction that I have to the situation that makes me feel uncomfortable, that reminds me of something that I went through similar, because the correlation is there, to dismiss that and say that you're just making it about race, I think is kind of inhumane. And I just wish that people would take us seriously more and not dismiss the trauma that racism brings through historically. That doesn't go away from a kumbaya or a progressive approach to where you're accepted or you're inclusive, because that's not our world 24/7. And just because you're a good and kind person and you accept people, there are people who do not accept us. There are people that use systemic racism against us. There are people who are outwardly discriminatory against us. And we package that and we pack that in, and we walk around trying to make everyone else feel comfortable so that we're not accused of always playing the race card. And so if there were anything that I wish that people could see about Black people, is that 99% of us don't make it all about race. It is something that we experience, and we know it, and it's real.
It's part of our fabric. We have dealt with it all our lives. Even as little kids, we have been trained to deal with it. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Great points. I do want to ask Chief Hodges if he wanted to share. I know the question was about racial identity, but I'd like to change up the question a little bit and ask you, what do you want people of color to know about law enforcement?
One, that we're people just like you. And again, we talked earlier about the biasness is individual. And yes, it can spread into groups. It can be in families. It's how you're brought up and all that stuff. But in general, I agree with Jamala. You typically enter law enforcement to do better for the community, to help out people. That's typically what I see and what I hear from new hires. I kind of lost track where I was going. But we try to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Sir,
I
you're
think the majority of law enforcement try to do the right thing, and they want to do the right thing. But sometimes those biases come out, and we know it. They do. We try to teach them not to have those biases, but sometimes you can't. That's not something you can really teach. We do try to do things like we're talking about his first impression that he had. We teach things like even to our operators, our dispatchers, and our officers, the contact you have with the public, that might be the only contact they ever have with the public. That person calling 911 may have never called 911 ever in their life before. So the way you treat them, and this goes farther beyond race, this is just treating people like people, treating them with respect, showing them dignity, being nice to them. Is there anything else I can do to help you? You know, that kind of stuff, because that first impression is huge. It goes the rest of your life. Here he is 20 years later talking about that incident. That incident was huge. So I think the majority of law enforcement want to do the right thing. That's what I believe.
Thank you. We'll switch over to solutions and kind of piggyback on what you talked about, doing the right thing. And one of the questions that Mayor Farmer has put in the chat box on our end is about how do we build trust, and especially when we're talking about the school resource officers and law enforcement and the general public and students. So the next question I'll throw back to Mayor Farmer and Chris and ask you some questions about what can be done to improve race relations in our city and our county. And let's think about hiring practices, think about the demographics. I looked at the 2019 census and it says 88% of Saline County is white. This is 2019. 5% are Hispanic, 8% are Black. What can be done to increase minority representation in our law enforcement? Would that make a difference? What are policies that can be done to improve trust with the communities of color, minority communities? Is it community policing? How can we improve community policing or interactions with school resource officers, building trust? Mental health, or policies about chokeholds or no-knock warrants? What can be done in terms of training to improve our policies, practices, interactions? I'll start with Mayor Farmer and then go to Chris.
I think the first thing we've got to do is review everything we're doing. I think the Chief Hodges is going through the accreditation program right now, and part of that process is reviewing our policies, reviewing the things we do, reviewing our training. But it doesn't just stop with, I know we're talking about the police department, but it doesn't just stop there. It goes citywide. We have 10 other departments that also have to review our policies, look at how we do things, look at hiring the best person for the job, no matter what the color is, the one that's going to work the hardest, the one that's going to give us the most, the one that's going to give the most for the citizens, because it is about the citizens. It doesn't matter what and I think, Robin, you said it was 88.5, something like that.
88% white, 5% Hispanic, 8% Black in the county.
And to me, we're all in this together. It doesn't matter if it's 20, 40, 60, 10. We're all people. We're all in this together. And I like what Chief Hodges said, and it's something that we've talked about many times in our department head meetings, that first impressions are the most important thing we can do. So we should always treat each other with the respect we want to be treated with. And I think that's the main thing is we got 280 some employees in the city of Benton. And if one of those 280 some employees is a bad apple, we got to get rid of that bad apple, and we got to put a good apple in its place, because we all know that a bushel of apples, if you have one rotten one, it ruins the whole bunch. So I think that's where we start, but I don't think it's just with police. I think it's throughout the entire city employment process. So it's about first impressions, being helpful, being a servant. I think that's one of the things that I've tried to get across to all departments is we're here to serve the people. And the people are everyone we come in contact with. It's not one neighborhood over another neighborhood, but it's all neighborhoods together. Now then, how do we get there? That's what I hope to hear some answers at the end of this meeting, kind of like the resource officers, like Ms. Thomas was talking about the trust in the schools and how they look up to them. What can we do more with our resource officer program? What can we change in policy to get them to build more trust among the students? We have a resource officer in every school right now. They're not there to show authority, but they're there to build relationships so that we can help the kids that are there. That's the reason they're there. That's the purpose of the resource officer program. But what can we do more to make that more incumbent to what we need it to be? And I'm hoping I hear some of those answers before the end of this conversation. The other thing with Travalis talking about his experience, what can we get across to the public that we want to know about these experiences? Because we can't address them if we don't know about them. And that's the reason I think the dialogue is so important to our community. So I'll turn it over to the preacher.
Sadly, the experience that keeps getting referenced about the car, the driving while black experience is one that from a young age, young black males are taught, keep your hand on the steering wheel, don't make any sudden movements. And so the thought is to be apprehensive when the police come. And I want to be clear that I am not, I am pro police. And, in an era where there is defund police and things of that nature, I need police to show up when I need them. Protect and serve is what I believe most police believe in. In addition to being a minister at Johnson Street, I'm an educator. I've been teaching in the Little Rock School District for 27 years. And so I know that just like it takes one bad police officer to give a bad rap to all police officers, you get a bad teacher that does something she has no business, and all teachers are incompetent, all teachers don't care. And so I understand that you can't paint with a broad brush, but in the black community, we raise, especially our black males, when they're driving, to have a distrust sometimes that's been built up because of things that have happened that is not the fault of every police officer, but it is a reality in a lot of black communities that may or may not be shared with people outside of the community. Speaking to the question of policies to improve trust and the police officers inside of school buildings, in some ways it's a Pandora's box because a police officer in the building is actually a police officer, and we have them in Little Rock. And one of the things I've talked to the officers in Little Rock about is often you have I'm a police officer and I'm always a police officer when I'm at work, but I'm also trying to work with these young people in the building. And sometimes the break that kid gets in the building, 2 weeks after graduation, he'll get arrested for this thing. And so you have this line of how do I help this young man without in some way giving too much of a break to someone that's going to allow them to believe that something's going to work out. And I wrote down 3 things we need to deal with perspective in hiring and in doing the job. And that's what you always have to consider: insight, foresight, and hindsight. with an officer, hindsight, they say, is always 20/20. So I have to go in with a perspective of what's happened in the past with this person have distrust of me that may have nothing to do with me, but I need to know the history of my department or the history of relations between the people of a community and the department. So that hindsight needs to be into my interaction with someone. I need to have insight into what people are thinking, and then and have some foresight. And I think all of those have to be in place when a resource officer or police officer interacts with a student of color, a minority, or anyone, because sometimes it's not race, it's class. And we're having a race discussion tonight, but class often comes into this as well. And so that you can deal with a poor white person that may have the same experience, or a rich black person in a certain area may not have an issue, but that's not the question I'm dealing with here. When we start talking about interaction with police, I heard training, and that's always, we'll get to it in solutions, but training to actually understand who you're dealing with. I know from a standpoint of a teacher, if he or she is hungry, they're not going to come to make a quick point and then get off of it. It kind of goes to it. I arrived in Little Rock during gang banging in Little Rock. That's when I was hired into the Little Rock School District. And so I remember I had a paper due because I'm an English teacher. Young man doesn't turn his paper. He waits until everyone leaves. He says, Mr. Threed, I didn't do my paper because they were shooting in my neighborhood, and I spent the entire weekend in the bathtub. That was his reality. I need to understand that's his reality, and my next thing can't be what the papers still do, because they've got a real life issue that's being addressed. I think that when race relations are in any way out of whack, when there has been something that caused distrust, like we're dealing with George Floyd and different things, when an officer shows up, that officer may not have done it, but they're a symbol, or they're seen as a symbol of the problem, even if that person hasn't done that. And so the training has to be, I needed to understand as a teacher, these kids are in a war zone. And so I need to educate him, but also need to understand it's a war zone. And I think the officers need to understand that may not be George Floyd, but that mom understands, but by the grace of God, George Floyd would have been my son. And I think that leads to an attention that the training will help when people interact. So we understand that didn't happen here, but it could have happened here, because that's a ticking time bomb in a lot of communities.
Thank you. Tavalis, could you share with us a little bit more about that trust and having the conversations, and what will it take to get, as Mayor Farmer has asked, to motivate individuals from our communities of color to have those difficult conversations with white communities about race, and to share their stories as you did tonight? What can we do? How can we encourage that to happen?
Well, a way to encourage that is to have those conversations. But my father used to say, when it's all said and done, it's more said than done. So we have to be in a situation where when we do say these things and they do get addressed, what are the consequences behind it? So we know that we're just not, like used to have a saying, tattletale, no one likes a tattletale. You say something and then nothing is resolved, and then you're in a situation like, why did I say anything anyway? And I know that comes from a distrust of the police force and the way society is portrayed and things that have happened and stuff like that. But I really feel like from the Black community, it's such a distrust and a separation between the police force and the Black community that they don't trust them enough to tell them. Because in certain situations, if you say something and nothing gets done, or then it's in question what really happened, what really this, and then you go down there and you try to explain it and nothing takes place, that's kind of something that you're standoffish and you're like, well, never mind, because nothing happened. So I think in order to have these conversations, we have to have something. One part of a solution would be, okay, have a policy in place and say, okay, if this happens, and if this takes place, and investigate, because I believe that a police officer is a very upstanding position and is very dangerous. And I think that sometimes police officers and firefighters and educators need a higher salary because they do so much. But at the same time, if you're going to have a higher salary, too much is given, much is tested, you got to have higher consequences. Like now you got to say, when you're about to racial profile or whatever, do I love my family enough to support my family where I can gather myself and bring myself back to like, okay, I'm a man and I'm a father just like this person may be. So let me have some compassion for this person. And because when you have more to lose, you'll think about it more. And when you don't have nothing but you're gonna get a slap on the wrist or whatever. But when you have consequences and you get compensated for being that pillar in the community, that police officer, and you get that respected position, you have to wear that badge with dignity and with honor, just like in the military. You have to do that. So when things do take place, you got to have higher consequences because you're held to a higher standard. And when something does happen and we say, okay, this is what is taking place, action has to be done immediately or as soon as possible after whatever investigation takes place. Now you're going to gain trust because police officers are there to protect and serve. Law enforcement, that's what they're there for. And have that accountability and say, okay, this is what is taking place. We've addressed it. We've seen that it wasn't taken properly. It wasn't taken care of properly. You reported this to us. We will address that officer and we will take care of it just like that. Because whenever you get arrested or whatever, they're going to put that in the paper and they don't, so whenever something takes place, it has to be taken care of as swiftly as possible, because the delay only broadens the gap between the unity that we need in the community. Because just like you said, Minister 3 said, we were taught as young Black men to keep our hands on the steering wheel, do that type. I got a 50-year-old son that's about to start driving. When my nephews were driving, I told them, hey, do this. When you get pulled over, put your stuff on the dashboard, show them your hands and all that type of stuff. And that's something that we've all had to go through as young Black men, learning how to. But when an officer comes at you with an attitude and says something, and you take his badge or whatever and you report it, we gotta know that something's going to take place so we can build that trust back. Because now it won't be as rebellion, because you say, okay, officer such and such did this to Mr. Reed, and it was reported, it got to the mayor, it got to the captain, and they were reprimanded as soon as possible. And bam, and now people will open up more to trust, put that trust back in the police department so they can protect and serve, and that accountability stuff on both sides. How you talk to me and how I respond, because you can't fight fire with fire. Like when the situation came with me, I had to be calm, and we have to even have dialogue between police officers and people of the community. Like, if this takes place, this is what we need to do. Have those seminars or whatever we need to have, so we can say, okay, if this takes place, this is how they're going to handle it. Okay, is this too much? Is this not enough? So we can have that not just on a Friday or Saturday night when the situation is game time. Practice makes perfect when you practice perfectly. So we need to go through those steps and build that trust and have dialogue and come to the community and show, okay, this right here is probable cause. This right here, if you're doing this, this is what it is. Once we know the recipe, we can fix the pot, but we got to know the recipe on both sides, so we know what we need to do to make this situation that much more, make it better, and have it where we have the accountability and we have the mutual respect for each other from both sides.
Thank you to all of us. I'm going to switch over to John Michael if he has some comments. I did see your hand, Minister.
I was just going to say, I'm glad Travas kind of brought up, start speaking about both sides of it, because I think a lot of what gets missed here is we're so quick to point the finger at what the police did all the time, but we don't want to look at the situation that caused that to escalate to that point. Not every officer jumps out ready to accuse a Black person of something or treat them in a certain manner. Most times it's only when a situation escalates to a point to where they have to maintain some kind of control. You can't break the law and that officer comes to interact with you, and because you don't want to be accountable for your actions, I'm gonna fight you, I'm gonna run off, I'm gonna do everything except for what you're telling me. And when something bad happens, it's always the police officer's fault, and nobody wants to address what that individual did that caused it to get to that point. So we have to go at it at that point as well. We have to talk to the people in the community as well, that you have to be accountable for your actions. If you don't want certain types of interactions with the police, don't break the law. Don't do certain things that's going to draw that type of attention to you, you know. And then, like Shavala said, if something has happened, if it is that one-off situation where, like I said, he's coming home, he gets pulled over, and this officer comes at him sideways, if it's reported, you got to follow up on that as well. You can't just think that because you gave that report that somebody is just going to do the hard work for you the rest of the way and make sure that this officer is reprimanded. You have to still follow through with that. So on both sides of the table, we do have to have that respect for each other, but we also have to understand that officers have a job to do. And we can't just show up to that job and then back off because you want to show your behind, so to say. And because I don't want to get in trouble, I have to back off and let you go and carry on and just continue to break the law. Otherwise, what's the point of having us here? So, you know, we have to understand that officers have to do their job, and we really don't want to do our jobs any more than we have to. I tell people that all the time in court. If I'm looking at a situation, you show up for court and I know that you're an hour late, and I know that there's a warrant for your arrest, and you start giving me that look like I'm about to run, I'm gonna tell you flat out, don't try to run for me. I'm gonna put on a little bit of weight in my chair, but I'm not as slow as you want me to be. I'm gonna catch you. So you gotta be accountable for your actions. So you can't just always assume it's a police officer's fault. I know we've kind of brought up you brought up chokeholds and whatnot. They're not the most glorified thing to see an officer have to do, but at the end of the day, they still to a degree have to maintain control of a situation. If you look at MMA fights, so to say, people get choked out quite often. And to my knowledge, nobody has died from being put in a chokehold in a fight. You know, so what led to, one, the chokehold having to be used, but what happened to where it had to be maintained? If the chokehold is applied appropriately, the person passes out, they let them go, they smack them on the back, they wake back up, all is done. If you're constantly fighting and still resisting and doing everything else, that officer can't just let go and walk away like, okay, well, he fought us and whooped our butt, whooped our butt, we got to let him go now. So, I mean, negative things happen and we don't want those things to happen. But like I said, you have to look at what led to that situation escalating to that point. So, you know, it's not just all the training for the police officers to do this, and this. We still need to have those conversations to conduct yourself accordingly, be responsible for your actions. If you want to live that lifestyle of breaking the law, understand the police are going to interact with you. If you have that innocent interaction, I say innocent, but if you have that off interaction where, like I said, it's an innocent, you're speeding and you get this officer that just wants to be the jerk of the world to you, conduct yourself in a manner to keep it as calm as possible. But like I said, report it. If you felt that you were being mistreated that severely, report it and follow through with it instead of holding some kind of animosity toward all police and now have the feeling that I'm never going to listen to the police again, because that creates more chaos.
Thank you. So accountability for our actions on both ends. And
yes,
Mr. Chris, you also had your hand up. That will be the
yes,
last time on this question.
There was a thought that triggered something for me. And I don't remember where I heard this before, but it kind of goes to one of the problems both ways. People see and hear what they think of you. When he was pulled over in his car and it was like, what was that term? What are you doing in Benton? That means you don't look like Benton. That means that the officer had a view of what someone from Benton looks like, and he also had a perspective of what kind of car he should be driving. So the officer heard, the officer saw what he thought of the young man. We deal with extreme, when the officer was mentioning that a chokehold can be used properly, it's not the chokehold used properly that we hear about. It's the chokehold used improperly, or the knee on the neck when the person saying they can't breathe. So it's extremes. But what they think of that guy when you got this 20 to whatever pound man with a knee on his neck calling for his mother, and you don't take your knee off his neck, that's because that's what you think of him. And so I think it's not getting to our solutions yet, it's getting to the problems. When we can address how we see people and what we think of them. I've jotted down when they said, come, we have found the Christ. He's from Nazareth. The question was, can any good thing come from Nazareth? So that's what I think of Nazareth. which is why I had an issue with Jesus, because of how I saw him and how I saw his place. And I think that when we have preconceived notions of any people, and this goes from the public towards the police and the police towards the public. I don't know if any of you watched The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but there was a perspective of Will in the perspective of Carlton when they got pulled over in that nice car. Will had come from Philadelphia. Carlton had grown up in Beverly Hills. Will was like, put your hands on the hood. Don't say this. And he was like, police. Carlton said, police are our friends. Will saying, this is going to go down, and by the time the screen blinks, they're in prison, because he said, this is how police see us. Now, that was a sitcom, but comedy always plays off reality. And so I think that one of the problems we have is, to the point of the officer, the kids have been trained, or certain communities have been trained to see police a certain way, and things have happened. So I guess the question that has to be answered, not is just the reality is people see and hear what they think of you. The question we've got to answer is, why do people see you and hear you that way?
Great point.
I agree.
Good job.
Thank you. We're gonna wrap it up because our time is drawing to a close, but I do have a question I want everyone to answer if you can. I know as ministers, mayors, it can be hard to keep it under 2 minutes. We're gonna ask you to keep it under 2 minutes. If you woke up tomorrow and your hopes for racial equity had been realized, what things would be different? How would you know that your hopes had been realized? So what would you see? What would you hear? What things would be different if you woke up tomorrow and your hopes for racial equity had been realized? Mayor Farmer, you want to start?
Yes. I guess the answer to that question, that we'd all be in heaven, because it would just be peace and tranquility. There would be no problems. There would be no issues. Everyone would get along. People would trust one another, and we'd actually have the relationships in which everyone wants, everyone talks about, but we never seem to get there. And I think that's what it would be like. And I did keep it under 10 minutes, Robin.
Thank you. Chief Hodges.
I think it would be like all this is in a history book, and we read it and think, wow, I don't even remember when that took place like that, or how did that ever happen like that? Kind of like if we think back about what did we do before cell phones, it'd be kind of that kind of memory, like I don't really remember that, but I know it happened.
Thank you. Jamala.
I think I kind of agree with the mayor and with Chief Hodges. I mean, for me, what that would look like is when that harmony is achieved, you're able to go back and have discussions and conversations about it without it not invoking feelings of, fear or people being divisive or, upset or anger. I wish that we would one day get to a place where we could talk about all of our differences and the things that make us who we are. We are all different. I do see color. That's God made us all different colors for his own reasons. So I see that because that's his work. And so what that will look like for me is to be able to wake up and we talk about these things and have a continuum of conversation so that history doesn't repeat itself. Because you can't just stop off at the part where it's all, glossy and roses. You have to keep talking about it and reminding yourself of the parts that were not so well and having those tough conversations so that it doesn't happen again. So.
Thank you. Jocelyn. You're on mute.
Thank you. I would see a city that is built on the common ground of respect and unity and everyone working together. I would see police officers not just responding to a call of 911 to deal with an issue or something in the community, but having built relationships by coming into the community, getting to know the people that they serve, people serving our communities that look like us, I think would be something that I would like to see when things change in those relationship areas between law enforcement and communities. And having built a idealism that everyone is respected, honored, and are needed in the community. I think that that's very, very important. And just having the resources that are being equitable throughout our city, and everyone can feel that they are a part, included, and having that inclusive setting in our city that everybody can participate and feel a part of. And that was one of the reasons I got on the city council. I was excited about seeing how our city really works and what do we have to do. But one thing I did learn, and that is even in that role, it takes the people in the community to participate, let their needs be known, and be willing to work with our city, our leaders, and they work with each other to make room for a better society in the city.
Thank you. We're going to go to Minister Chris.
It'll be a place of accountability and love. Jesus said you'll always have the poor with you, so it's not going to be a utopia. There'll still be problems, but the way we handle the problems will not be based on gender, color, poverty, class. They'll be handled with love. And when the Bible says love covers a multitude of sins, what it'll do is it will allow me to see people, and if they need patience from me, I'll give them patience because I want that same patience. So the same way we would want to be treated, those golden rules, really, the simple things, this is what I call complicated simplicity. We kind of know the things we need to do. What's complicated is actually doing them. And so taking the love we give to the people we care the most about and handing those things to the people we care the least about, those things would take place. And so we don't have a separate set of rules for different groups of people.
Thank you so much, John Michael.
Well, I think pretty much everybody's hit it, but I mean, it will just be peace and respect. I mean, and as Pastor 3 said, you know, just love for everyone. We would not have the need to just constantly have to look over our shoulders, feel like we're being judged for things. We'd be able to go accomplish our day-to-day lives without having to feel like someone is constantly thinking ill of you and looking for a reason to mistreat you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Tavalis, or as my husband would say, Trayvalis.
Yes. I would have to take a quote from A.R. Bernard, and it says, "If we don't understand yesterday, you'll be confused about today, and we'll repeat the past tomorrow." So I believe if we woke up the next day or tomorrow and all our stuff was together, I believe it'd just be that we finally dwell together in unity and we finally put our words into action. The conversations got moved upon, the suggestions got put into action, the prayers, and we stopped talking about praying together and we prayed together, and God heard our voice. And that's just like when he was sleeping in the bottom of the ship. It wasn't a storm that woke him up. It was the people who loved him went to him and called him, and that's what woke him up. And I think that's exactly what's going on, and that's what would be. It's not the storm that he's concerned about. It's when the people that love him and love one another go to him, he'll wake up and he'll calm it. So that's what I think it'll be.
Thank you. And Veronica, I know that you were mining some of the conversations. Were there any questions or comments from our participants on Facebook that we wanted to draw out?
Sure, I will share a few. The fabric of our trauma comment, people absolutely love that phrasing. I did too, I wrote it down. There was a comment about, I'll read it verbatim. There used to be a time when police officers weren't looking to arrest kids. Just being taken home by the police was punishment enough by the parents. Sometimes they just need to know someone, sometimes they just need someone to show that they care. There's a teacher that mentions that the resource officers in her school do show up in a way where young people get a good interaction with the resources officers. They build relationship with other students and they are amazing. And then there is a comment about how Benton needs more male members of the Black community involved, not just females.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. I know we have a couple of final closing thoughts from Jamala and Chief Hodges, but before we go there, one of the questions I had, I didn't get to ask earlier, you talked about your reaccreditation process, and the thought came to mind about one of the solutions, especially hearing from the public about more men being involved, more interaction. Is there an opportunity for more community involvement in that review process to be able to share their perspectives as you go through that reaccreditation, looking at your policies and procedures? I know you had some final comments and thoughts, Chief Hodges, and then we'll go to Jamala.
I'll address your question first. The accreditation process is already a standards that are built in place that we have to meet their needs throughout all of our policies and procedures and standards of conduct. And then they come evaluate us on whether we meet their needs. And if we don't meet their needs, then we don't become accredited. And if we do meet their needs, then we are accredited. So there's really not an external review process that even has the potential there. We don't, there is no choosing and picking. It's here's what they offer and we either abide by it or we don't. So if that answered that question for you. The thing I wanted to bring up was I have probably watched more law enforcement videos than anyone else in this talk group, if I was guessing. But I see the same videos that you see as well when they show up in the news. And quite frankly, they scare me sometimes. Some of them I look at and I think, oh my God, I can't believe that even happened. And a lot of times we don't have all the information there. We can't tell if it's racially motivated or not. There's no way to, because the video starts and the next thing you know, something's happening. They scare me so bad that I teach my kids the same thing that y'all were talking about earlier. I teach my kids to keep your hands on the steering wheel when you're stopped by an officer. Don't move your hand unless you tell him where your hand's going. If you need to get a wallet out of your pocket, tell him where it's at and ask me, is it okay if I go get that wallet? Because mistakes happen, accidents happen. Police officers are human. They get excited just like everybody else. The last thing I want is for my kid to be an accident. So I teach them to do what that officer says, no matter what it is, and we can handle it later if the officer did something wrong. If something happens to them, we can't handle that.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Jamala.
So first I wanted to tell, Chief Hodges, you and I, we've known each other for some years, and I want to thank you guys so much for all the hard work that you do. We have a really, like I said, I'm a transplant. I don't know the history, but my experiences and the school resource officers with my kids have been amazing. And I know you guys do a lot. So all the things that go bump in the night that we don't know about, that's because of you guys. And I want to thank you for that. But when we were talking about solution, and this is kind of, I wanted to not really touch a lot on, but Michael was bringing up some issues, and it made me go back to think, I think sometimes we put a lot of expectations on civilians who are not trained to be able to react against law enforcement who are trained. And one of the things that if I could offer any HR perspective, we're talking about replacing bad apples and not having bad apples, is one of the things I wish that law enforcement across the country would understand is that you have the position of authority. you have the final say so in whether I have a good experience or a bad experience. And sometimes that authority does not need to necessarily be mixed with ego. And I think that is a huge problem, more than race and class, is that authoritative mindset that I cannot be questioned. And me as a civilian, I can't ask, why am I being pulled over? Why am I being stopped, without offending a person in authority? But at the end of the day, your officers, they have the authority to over me financially. They write me a ticket, it's going to hit my pocket, it's going to hit my insurance. They have the authority over the situation where I end up home, or however the experience is. So maybe more training on them managing their authority. They don't have to exercise that. I'm not saying Benton Police Department, just law enforcement. You don't have to always walk in your authority. Sometimes having an authority is cloaked with compassion and less ego. And so if there were anything I could change, or any training I could make up, or whatever, would be how to implement that process to where officers understand that you don't have to snatch people out of the cars. You don't have to snap back when someone asks a question. I'm a civilian. I could have a bad day. I could think you're a crappy person, and it doesn't matter that I shouldn't. Doesn't mean that I shouldn't make it home. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't have a chokehold, or a knee in my neck, or be tased just because I smart off. That's my. I'm a civilian, and you're trained to de-escalate, and I am not. So I think we have to turn this burden on the civilians or people that are being stopped. We should not be expected to de-escalate when we don't have training in that. Yes, we behave, but I should not have to try to de-escalate law enforcement. And a lot of that comes from learning how to manage your authority. And so if there were any type of feedback or training that you guys could invest in, I think that would be how to separate that authority and that ego, and make sure that those two worlds aren't colliding when you have interactions with everyday people.
And a lot of that, if I can, a lot of that comes from your administrative staff.
Yeah.
And what the officers know they're going to accept or not accept. And I feel like we have a good control of that here.
Yes.
Thank you all for sharing. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint real quick, because that has a list for everyone to see what our next steps are. So do you see that? Can you see it? Yeah. All right, so on that PowerPoint, it says that our next dialogue will be August 13th. That will be on education and equity. Of course, Mayor Farmer said that he's going to participate and be on that, along with Superintendent Skelton, and educators in the Benton School District, as well as parents, students, former students, current students. So we're looking forward to that conversation. August 27th, it'll be a broader discussion, our beloved community. And we have invited participants from different sectors of our community, from government, from nonprofits and community organizations, as well as churches, to be a part of that dialogue. Part of this discussion and part of the question that came up earlier is about getting to share our perspective, building trust. We encourage everyone to share your solutions and recommendations. We are compiling those and sharing those with the mayor, because he has a genuine interest in where do we go from here. And so we want to be able to share solutions. So if you have ideas that you feel weren't shared here, that you have some things you want to include, be sure and send those to us. Include them on the Facebook page, email them to me, or contact the mayor's office, but we would like to be able to compile that. My email address is rrfreema@uark.edu. We're also going to be starting a Be the Bridge small group study, and those are groups that are designed to be people, 10 people or so in each small group, and it does focus on race and reconciliation. And having those conversations, those difficult conversations that Tavalis led us in tonight, and sharing perspectives that the chief shared and Jamala shared that come from the heart. And so if you're interested in being in a small group, you can contact Janet Dixon. Her email address is listed there, j928dixon@gmail.com, or you can call her at 501-317-6449 and be a part of that Be the Bridge. We expect to start those sometime in mid-August. And we're looking forward to having that participation. Our goal is to get everyone to see each other as individuals, that we all have a great role to play, and we have great things that we can share. Our perspectives matter. And when we begin to share dialogue and build conversation, we build our community. We want to especially thank Mayor Farmer and Chief Hodges for being here tonight. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all of our panelists. Really, you all have shared so much tonight. John Michael, Jamala Tavalis, Minister Tavalis, Minister Threet, and Alderwoman Cash. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. We appreciate you joining in this discussion. And again, if you would like to follow up, be sure and get in touch with me about the Be the Bridge or talk to Janet. And we look forward to having our next conversation. Veronica Jackson, thank you so much for your support and helping to keep me on track tonight. Any final closing thoughts for Mayor Farmer before we say goodnight?
Hey, I'd just like to thank everyone for sharing, and most importantly for being honest and open, because that's the only way we're going to build a bridge, is to be honest and open with each other. And the whole object behind this is to build that bridge, to build the relationships and the trust that we all talk about, we all want, but we don't necessarily always work towards getting there. So thank each and every one of you tonight for tonight.
All right, and if John Michael didn't see in our personal chat box that Chief Hodges said he has an application waiting for you. So there seems to be some recruitment going on there. So you two need to connect. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good evening.
And I'll approve that hire too.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Be blessed.
Have a blessed evening. Be safe.